lovely to be with you today. We're going to talk about getting awkward, and there may be some awkwardness on my part with the coughing, and maybe a little awkwardness on your part with some of the things that we're going to be discussing, but it's my pleasure to be joining you today all the way from Austin, Texas. And if you haven't visited our fair city, I hope you will sometime, but please don't come during South by Southwest. It's a little too full. So we know a lot about design-led companies performing better than other companies that are not investing in UX. That kind of goes without saying. But we also know that research should be leading design. That gets a little tricky with prickly subjects. So I want to talk to you today about how you can handle some of those prickly subjects that come up in the course of your research. This talk was kind of born by some prickly subjects that came up during the course of my research. When I went into private practice a little bit more than 6 years ago, I came over to the UK to do some research for a multinational financial services client that had a pension or retirement scheme. And Americans, by the way, don't invest in retirement schemes. That's Bernie Madoff. We call it retirement plans. So language is an important consideration with this stuff. But the client was really taken aback that the conversations kept turning toward death, which is kind of, to me, why wouldn't it be about death? The death is, retirement planning is the intersection, literally, of death and money. So when we think about thorny challenges, as user experience designers, these things should be coming to mind. They should be expected to you, and you can help your clients be more prepared and design better things. All right, I am American. You may have noticed that there was an election. We're feeling a little bit self-conscious about that right now. Voting is something that is meant for everyone. It's also a touchy topic. I didn't want to cover politics in this, but I kind of can't resist because there's some object lessons in what has just happened for us. So to design for everyone, you really have to understand everyone, or at least as many perspectives as possible. I would like for you to look to your left and look to your right. Welcome to the elite. So, our ability to talk about difficult topics is in peril these days. We are in our own social media echo chambers. We are seeing social media feeds that are just feeding us back things that we already like and opinions that we already hold. And a homogenous viewpoint is not doing us any favors in terms of our ability to predict the world around us. And many people, including pollsters and pundits, are shocked by the recent election results. Well, when you have poor framing, that leads to poor responses. You draw poor conclusions. So this next slide is a little bit cheeky, but please bear with me because this is the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So framing, taboo, and social acceptability of behavior impact everything when it comes to research. And researchers need to understand the difference between what people say they do and what people actually do. And if you're going to ask people about doing socially unacceptable things, you need to make it okay for them to safely tell you the truth without judgment. And what we have with the recent American election and the polling that took place is a failure to provide that safe space for the people that were being asked those questions. So now we're stuck trying to make sense of it all. I'm trying to make sense of it. You're probably trying to make sense of it as well. The election's behind us. I really like this visualization by Dan Rome, who just posted it to Medium a day or two ago. And instead of that predictive insight, we're trying to figure out what happened. So you'll notice that this actually matches pretty well to the geography of the United States. So it's a bit of a rough map in the form of an airline seating chart. And this is showing how the states voted. Red is for Republican and blue is for Democrat. And so that's Trump and Clinton, respectively. And it's showing a little bit of a correlation between the respective geography and the psychological perspective on openness. So we see that the states that are bordering the coast, either East Coast or West Coast, have a view that's a little bit more external outside the country, a little bit more open. And the more of those interior states are a little bit more self-focused, a little bit more concerned about things that are happening closer to home. In the middle, you'll see IL, that stands for Illinois. Anybody know what big city is in Illinois? Shout it out. Chicago, right. And so Chicago is not really considered a flyover city, right? So that's going to be a different kind of demographic and psychographic there, and that may be one reason why you see that that right in the middle is blue. All right. Let's put that election behind us and move right along. Okay, this is your fair warning. We are going to be talking about difficult things. It's, if you have issues and you've recently lost someone and think that you might be overwhelmed and don't want to hear about death, please leave the room. If you have issues about sex and something horrible has recently happened to you and you think you might be overwrought, please leave the room, okay? Fair warning. You may be uncomfortable during this talk, and that's okay. Let's start with the V word. And by V word, I mean your vagus nerve. So relax, people. What did you think I was going to say? So we're going to talk about when it gets a little uncomfortable in the course of our conversations with people. Sometimes we need this emotional reboot, like, oh, this is a little bit much. And the best thing that we can do for ourselves is inhale for 2 and exhale for 4. So let's do it together. Let's try it. Inhale, 1, 2, and exhale, 1, 2. And this calms your vagus nerve. So this helps reduce your fight or flight response, calms you down. It's going to allow you to better focus. It's going to allow you to better respond to your participants' particular answers and questions and carry on a dialogue with them. So repeat that as needed throughout the course of this talk and in your field work as well. And let's talk about field work. So we often approach our field work with an interview guide and a plan for some structured Q&A, and we know exactly what information we need to be able to design really great products and services. And then we get a little bit freaked out when the people we're talking to have a lot of emotions that we were not prepared for. And so you do want to think about how you'll respond to somebody else's emotion when you are asking them a line of questioning and all of a sudden you see that their eyes well up, or you see that their cheeks become flushed, or you see a change in their breathing or body language. How are you going to react to this? And how you react to this dictates what kind of findings you're going to get out of that research. So be present for those emotions. Help your participants talk through those emotions. But beware of those emotions because it's a trap. The best way that you can prepare for your own excellent research is to do work on yourself. So we focus a lot on our users in the course of our research, but we've got to do that work on ourselves. I want you to do some soul searching and think about the intersectionality of the topic that you are working on and other things in the course of our humanity. What other deeply human topics might that touch on? Retirement planning is an example where that investing is really about your death ultimately. Spend some time thinking it through and figure out which ones are deeply human because those are the ones that are usually the most taboo. We treat the users of our products and services like guinea pigs a lot of the time, or lab rats, and sometimes we treat them as if that's all they were, but we do this at the expense of their humanity. And when we talk about human-centered design, I think we miss the point sometimes. So I want you to be prepared. Be prepared for depth. Be prepared for darkness. Be prepared for intimacy. When you sit down with someone for a user research interview, maybe it's 60 minutes, maybe it's 90 minutes, maybe it's 2 hours, you are giving them your undivided attention. This may be the most intimate contact that they have had in months or years. Think about that for a minute. We go to dinner with our friends and our loved ones, and how often are they on their phone, right? How often do we get to spend that kind of uninterrupted time with somebody focused just on us, who's just interested in our point of view and wants to talk to us about it? It's an intimate act. So I want you to be prepared to have tough conversations with people. And I want you to understand how they feel and what they want and what they need about things that are hard to discuss. And sometimes these conversations start in unexpected ways, but the important thing is that we start them and we keep having them. So I'm gonna switch gears for a moment and talk to you a little bit about my mother. This is another thing that kind of informed my approach about my own research and about death. My mom has a note on the table next to her telephone. It says, "In case something happens to me." And there's a list of about 20 names and phone numbers and what her relationship to these people are and what state they live in. And I saw this and I was like, "Mom, are you okay? Is there something we need to talk about?" And she says, "No, I'm okay. You're not ill or anything? You're not dealing with a dire medical condition you haven't disclosed?" No, she's fine. But she had given some deep thought about her own death, and because she lives alone, how would the people who care about her most, who don't live there, know that something had happened to her? She's being thoughtful about, God forbid, about the person who will find her dead body. That's consideration right there. That's pragmatism too. So I think there's not a better example of really getting in touch with what your own mortality means. So this talk is a little bit about that, a little bit inspired by my mother. And the good news is that we are alive, so we want to make the most of our time while we're here. And the bad news is everybody in this room is gonna die. You're all gonna die. I'm gonna die, you're gonna die, and you're gonna die, and you're gonna die. We are all going to die. And we don't know when, and we don't know where, but it's going to happen. Are you ready? So, what's a good death? We're all gonna have one. What's a good death? What does that mean? How do you feel about death? Who are the people that will be affected by your death? How do you want them to experience your death? My mom doesn't want anyone to be put out or put to any trouble, so she's already made a list. She's got her finger on the pulse of a good death, but what about you? So I want you to think about preparing for these things. Prepare for the research that you're going to do on these tough topics. Begin by looking inside yourself. In the course of most human lifespans, we spend the majority of our time living, not dying. But dying is the thing we fear the most. So understand your own context. How do you feel about death? What has that been influenced by? Have you seen someone die? Have you ever touched a dead body? Do you know what to do after a death? What experience do you want others to have with your death? What can you do to enable those experiences for those people? Sometimes it's helpful to think about what you want those people to avoid. What can you protect them from? So I've just shown you pictures of a cemetery, and now, because it was just Halloween, this is a little fun and game for the children who came to trick or treat at my office. It's called Digging Through a Graveyard. This is how we introduce children to death, through rice and beans and hidden treats and surprises. It's a strange thing to do, but we introduce it slowly and gradually. We are all going to die, and we need to get okay with it. So we have some crazy traditions. And you need to prepare yourself by looking at these things. Continue by looking around. Sure, this is me dressed as a witch from Harry Potter, but I'm also, dancing with a mummy. And what's a mummy but a dead body? So, yeah, he's got a cocktail in his hand, but, we're mocking death is really what we're doing with Halloween. We're reminding ourselves that we are going to die, and we're mocking it a bit. But I want you to look to other cultures as well, besides your own. So Dia de los Muertos is the Day of the Dead. This is a big deal in Texas, where I live, because we have a large population of Mexican descent. And despite the focus on death, it's actually considered a really lovely day of celebration. It's a day of remembrance. It's a day of connection with relatives and loved ones who have died before us. And so altars are set up with photos and food and candles and favorite items from the deceased. And many of the people that I know who really enjoy the connection and laughter as they tell stories and talk about their dead relatives look forward to this every year as a form of reunion. They're getting closer to the people that they love and they miss. And it's a way of feeling as if those people are still with them. And I think that that's a lovely thing. I want you to consider different contexts as you're thinking about these tough topics. Where do people go when they die? Is that where you want to go when you die? What does that mean to you? You've got to get out of your own way with this. You have to be curious. You have to be interested. This is going to happen whether you're informed or not. So spend a little time having a perspective on it. I know a therapist in Austin that I met with through the course of researching this talk, and she and her partner have done a Kickstarter. They have a game, it's a card game, called Morbid Curiosity. I have an early printing here if anybody wants to come up and take a look at it later. But the idea is that there's trivia, there are different questions, and it's meant to be played, over a glass of wine with friends, to really just consider some of these things. She does a lot of work with grief and with young people, and that was part of the impetus in the development of this game. I think it's a great way to familiarize yourself with some of the different aspects of death that we don't consider on a regular basis and that you might not be familiar with. Another option for you is to look into a death salon. And what I mean by that is there are gatherings of people that are talking about death and about different aspects of death. And there are meetups and things like that. And there are some happening here in the UK. Go attend one and see what you think. You can read up on things. I would also recommend that you familiarize yourself with hospice if you're not already familiar with them. But get comfortable with your death because it's going to happen. You have to consider some practical aspects about your death. If you don't consider these things, they're going to be decided for you. And how will you feel about that? So, get right with yourself. When you are feeling peaceful that you've addressed these things, then you are bringing that same peacefulness and confidence, quiet confidence, to your research. This topic is not going to ruffle your feathers. You are not going to be upset when this comes up for someone else, and you're going to be more available to them in the course of that research. You're going to get better insights, and you're going to develop better products. So get open and stay open. Create a safe space for your participants. Remove any shame from the topic at hand. Understand the differences between behavior and opinion, and also the challenges that are inherent in self-reporting. Adjust your approach as you need to verify things. When you're out holding interviews, you need to create and hold emotional space for them. I don't want you shying away from the negatives because that is where the opportunity is. So a couple of resources for you. Morbid Curiosity, I already mentioned, deaf salons, Hospice, another mortician that you can follow on Twitter for fascinating insights. She's based in LA. She is The Good Death on Twitter. And again, we want to celebrate being alive because that's where we're at right now. Okay, everyone, let's take a deep cleansing breath because I know I just forced you to confront your own mortality and it's stressing me out that you guys are a little stressed out. In for 2 and out for 4. Okay, everybody feeling a little bit better? Yeah? Don't get too comfortable because we're about to talk about sex. Ready? Okay, so I'm going to ease you into it. We're going to talk about sex and design first. Who knows who Eve Behar is? Raise your hand. Yeah? Who's got a jawbone up speaker? Jawbone speaker? Yeah? Okay, so Eve Behar is an industrial designer who's got the best PR of any industrial designer I know. Fast Company covers his stuff all the time. He's got a line of sex toys, I believe are produced under the brand Jimmy Jane. And so a lot of people, I mean, if Fast Company is covering your sex toy designs in a business publication, you've got some good PR. How many people know who Joanie Blank is? Anyone? Bueller? No, okay. Joanie Blank, I'm so happy and proud to be able to introduce you to Joanie Blank, who is a pioneer of pleasure. Joanie Blank died this year at age 79 from cancer. Joanie Blank designed vibrators. Joanie Blank opened a female-friendly sex shop in the late 1970s. This was a time when Harvey Milk was around in San Francisco. If you're familiar with the movie about him, the biopic about him, it was a time when it was not okay, at least in the US, to be out. Homosexuality was not tolerated publicly. It was a very different time than what we're living in right now. Sex shops were in dark, skeezy places that were unsafe and that you would not want to go to. Joanie Blank was a sex educator who worked with the University of California in San Francisco, and she worked with non-orgasmic women. That knowledge about, and her belief that sexuality is pleasure is a human right, that belief changed everything. So let's talk about what a sex shop can teach you about user experience. This is one of her former employees talking about what it was like to work there in the 80s. It's an open place. It's an inviting place. It's a place without shame. Products are on display. One of the more interesting things about this shop is that all of the vibrators were tested by employees before they were sold. I know that sounds a little weird, but you have to understand that with a segment, a market segment, with so much shame attached to it, inferior products were the norm. You would spend a lot of money on something, go to a dangerous part of town to have done it, and then get something home that was unreliable and of poor quality, right? Joanie Blank changed all that. Her philosophy was about respect for the customer, respect for the human, no judgment, radical unflappability. It didn't matter where you were on the spectrum of human sexuality or what kind of thing you were into. You could go into a Good Vibration store and ask somebody about it without being judged. It was a safe place, and it still is. And you're very lucky that there are some safe places like this here in the UK. So on my way down last week, I stopped at Shh, which of course is the name of your store here in the UK. And there's some lovely people in this store. They actually made me a cup of tea without me even asking. Who makes tea in a sex shop? You people are charming. So, lovely hospitality. I had a nice chat with the staff, and one of the staff members shared some of the common concerns that she hears from people who come into the store, which is about being non-orgasmic, and men. A lot of you are concerned about being able to perform. So they're ready to talk to you about all of these things and introduce you to products that can help. So let's take a moment. Now you're British, so I'm not going to inflict too much pain on you, but I want you to take a moment and I want you to close your eyes. This is just for you. I am not going to ask you to share this with anyone. This is your personal, private moment, okay? Close your eyes. Picture a sexual act. Do it right now. Everybody got a visual? I'm hearing laughter, so I think that you're there. Okay, open your eyes. Now I want to ask you, what was your scenario? How many people did it involve? Was it with people of the same genders or different genders? Were there people of color involved? Were there different body shapes or body types involved? Did everyone have all of their limbs? Right? People come in all shapes and sizes, different abilities, all different flavors, but we put them into little tiny boxes. And so whatever you've just pictured reflects your own bias. And if you are going to examine sex in the intersection of any product or service that you're designing, you need to be aware of your own bias, because there's a lot out there that's happening that is not part of your world. And it's difficult to talk about these things. It's hard to get close to them. They're a little spiky, and birds of a feather flock together. So the people on your teams and in your company may have the same biases that you do. So you need to spend some time thinking about that and following the thread of these different discussions and where do things intersect and how do they connect. And be okay with the unknown. You can't always see what's coming. So now I want to ask you, what is good sex? What is good sex? There's a lot of different factors at play, from your childhood and the things that you were exposed to during your formative years, your early experiences, who you've partnered with, what you've been doing lately. I want you to be sex positive. I want you to have a comprehensive definition of sexuality that is big and broad and open. I want you to view sexual health as a human right. It is a human right. I want you to focus on the life-enhancing aspects of it. I don't want you to be judgmental just because somebody else is into something else. It doesn't have any reflection on you or your preferences. I want you to really deeply consider this, and I want you to work towards a sex-positive attitude. And how do you do that? You start by understanding your own feelings about sex, where they're rooted, how you got that way. I want you to understand your own pleasure. What turns you on? What feels good? I want you to talk with your partner if you have one. Find out how they feel. I want you to consider terms and language. This is not just for yourself, but for other conversations you're going to have. Not all of us are comfortable or even know the correct names for parts of our anatomy. Blame our parents who called it our willy, right? So you need to be conversant in both slang and proper names for things, because if you're dealing with a research participant who's only using cutesy names, you need to know and be able to clarify what it is that they're actually talking about when they say that thing. And you need to be able to have it even though it's a difficult conversation. So get comfortable with your sex. You can do some exercises on your own to get more comfortable. Focus on feeling and sensation. Focus on your own pleasure. Learn how your body works. Learn the names of the parts. Talk about what you like and what you don't. And get out of your own box. There's some great resources out there. I highly recommend the Guide to Getting It On, which is very conversational in tone. It's very cheekily written. It's a fun and funny book. It's used in over 50 universities as a college text in the US. Joanie Blank, who I talked a little about, wrote a kid's book, which is now available through a Creative Commons license. I've included a link to that online, and it's about talking to your children about sex. Remember how I asked you how many people were in the image you created there? So there's a whole big wide world of polyamory, and those folks have their own language and their own challenges, and are you including them in your research? Because there's a lot of people doing that. These are 2 books that you can look into for a little bit more information about that. For a humorous yet historic take, you might enjoy following the Horror-storian on Twitter. And there are lots of podcasts as well that you can look into. So don't be scared about investigating other people's sexuality. You get to maintain your own boundaries. Just because you're talking to somebody about what they like and what they're doing doesn't mean that you have to take any of that on for yourself, but you should be able to get a view to it. You need to create and hold that space for them and respect their boundaries as well as your own. Again, language is very important. So you should be using your interview guides as a structure, but you should be letting things kind of grow on the vine and see where things take you. And once you get that information, you're able to design a real blue sky product that's meeting an actual need, and it's based on a real foundation with real actual roots. And it's just a much more pleasant way to be. So you're going to take this information back to your product teams, and that's going to be difficult too. You think confronting your own mortality and sexuality is difficult? Try bringing it back to work. So my advice to you is to give them an alert in advance. Don't approach any of these conversations cold. Tell them that you're going to be having a meeting to discuss death or discuss sex and your product or service. Provide a preview of the information. If you can maybe have an email summary or some highlights that you can share, give them some time to adjust. Don't just spring it on them. And set some ground rules for language and discussion, both for productivity, but also for boundaries, because you don't necessarily want to work in a sexualized environment. So make sure that that's okay. I did some research in the course of preparing this talk, and I spoke with someone who evaluates advertising images for a major social network that you're all on, I'm sure. And his job is looking at ads all day and deciding what's over the line and what's not. Here's the universal rule that he told me: bending over is not okay. So you might want to avoid that in your meeting with your team. He also shared with me that the training that he had to undergo for his work involved sitting in a glass conference room with pornographic images projected on the wall, so everyone walking by was just... and then, of course, having to play game show style about what is and is not acceptable from their rules, and then being forced to point out that when he doesn't know why something's unacceptable, and the trainer just whacks the screen and says, look at that wiener. So again, language, because is wiener really what you want to be saying in the workplace? So figure out some things about how you want to communicate there, and then focus on sharing that context, insight, and opportunities. And thank you all for being such a lovely and gracious audience.